tell Jack about the dowry.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
I've been thinking about this. If you don't have a wedding, we can just get married.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm Advocacy Manager Reagan Stone. Since Trump first entered the political arena, voter fraud, illegally cast votes, and frankly, a bunch of bull has been proclaimed surrounding elections. From denying the legitimacy of the 2020 election to puppets of their master, like Governor Greg Abbott, Attorney General Ken Paxton, and fired secretaries of states, one after another, are proclaiming our elections are at risk. I agree they're at risk, but really, it's by the actions of their own hands. In a free society, an election is the fundamental instrument towards a government run for and by the people. And the actions of the aforementioned are not only wrong and easily proven so, but those guys are working to tear the literal fabric of our great society apart through racism, fear, and one big lie after another. So in true Progress Texas style, we brought to you a cohort of truth seekers and tellers surrounding elections and voting rights. And we're centering it on bills proposed and being voted on in the Texas legislature, albeit all of us are working to stop them in some shape or fashion. Vicente Martinez Jr. is a seasoned voter engagement officer, fundraiser, and campaign manager serving as the Texas State Director for Vote Riders. He's worked for numerous campaigns, nonpartisan organizations like the ACLU of Texas, as well as the Texas Democratic Party. He's a graduate of the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, and bases his operations down in the RGV, where I think you're joining us from today. Welcome to the podcast, Vicente.
Thank you so much for having me.
Vicente, did I miss anything in your background that you want to highlight? And can you give me an overview of Vote Riders and the work y'all do here in Texas?
Yes, I'm a border native. I speak English and Spanish. I'm queer, and I'm happy to be here. I always tell folks an organizer by heart and force into electoral politics because I'm sick and tired of people's rights being infringed, being disenfranchised, and basically folks not paying attention to the people who are being affected by various bills. I am the Texas Director for Vote Riders. We are a nonpartisan security organization. As I mentioned, I'm the Texas Director, but we do operate nationally. We do voter education and outreach. So we basically inform folks of what IDs are needed to vote in the state of Texas. We have info cards, English and Spanish. We have a website for every single state of what ID laws are in those specific states, as well as we do presentations, work with partners across the state of Texas. And we have full-time folks in other 6 states, but we help people across the country to ensure the right ID needed to vote, which that leads me to the other program. We do voter ID assistance. So we help folks obtain a Texas ID or driver's license, 2 out of the 7 different IDs needed to vote in the state of Texas. We walk people through the process to obtain their ID. If they need help replacing their birth certificate, we pay that. If they need transportation to and from the ID issuing office, such as Social Security office or DPS, we help them with that transportation and pay for any fees associated with getting an ID. And also this year, we started doing advocacy because we saw how voter ID laws were affecting folks and how it harms our democracy. And of course, I can talk a little bit more about it later on.
Well, thank you for being here again. And a person of many hats there. Appreciate you joining us for just a little bit. Well, next on the docket, and I'll give the credit, the brains behind this episode, Robin Lederer is an award-winning marketing executive turned consultant who led high-impact initiatives for the global business unit at AT&T. Serving the League of Women Voters of Dallas, she pioneered a focus on how the state maintains its voter list and how that impacts access to the polls. And with this understanding, has co-founded the National Coalition for Voter Rights. Robin, welcome to the show. And please start off by telling us how you went from being a volunteer and I think a board member with the League of Women Voters to jumping into research and co-founding the National Coalition for Voting Rights.
Because I met Andrea Barreiro.
That's beautiful. A friend made, right?
Yes, a friend. This is what happened. We started the National Coalition for Voter Rights serves as a research and communications hub focused on understanding the voter experience in the election administration process. I had no idea about this. My husband got a letter in the mail and it said we had moved and have 30 days to respond from county elections. So that started me down the road to thinking, what is this system? Because I worked in big corporation. Understanding a system is really important. Input, outputs, the outcomes. So our work zeroes in on once you register to vote, what happens to your record? You essentially become a record in a database. And federal and state law manages that record. And they call it voter list management. Great name. VLM, we'll call it VLM. So 5 years ago, Andrea and I were checking out the system. And I realized from looking at public surveys that millions of Texans have been purged over the years. Millions, multi-millions of voters across the country have been purged due to voter list maintenance. So I had more to say, but I could stop there wherever you want me to go. But that's what got us into it. People are being purged. 95,000 voter registrations never made it through in Texas between 20 and 22.
And we're gonna deep dive into all these things, but I want to say that each of you, it's been really a pleasure to get to know y'all over the last few months of this legislative cycle. And I might add, all y'all are fresh on the show, first time guests here on the podcast, but we only have one PhD with us today. So Dr. Andrea Barreiro is a professor of mathematics, but like any Renaissance woman, she's got a wide interest in numbers that takes her from researching neuroscience to voting rights. Currently at SMU in Dallas, she's contributed to mathematical neuroscience, including modeling network correlations, mechanisms for retronasal olfaction, and novel algorithms for neural cluster identification. To folks like me, that means groundbreaking, like super, super smart stuff. And for those wondering why in the world she's here on the call today, we're going to ask Dr. Barreiro, neuroscience to gerrymandering and electoral policy. Is there a correlation, or do you just have a bunch of free time that can't be quantitatively understood here? But really.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I don't know that I have that much free time, but I was, as an applied mathematician and trained as a mathematician, mathematics is the universal language. It can be applied to modeling and understanding anything that happens to us, anything that's happening in the world. So I've worked in fluid dynamics, I worked in neuroscience, and I started to think about voting rights in the context of gerrymandering, when the legislative session was occurring, where Texas maps were going to be redrawn. And mathematicians have actually made a lot of progress, not necessarily me, but other mathematicians have made a lot of progress in developing methods for assessing gerrymandering, methods for developing random families of maps that satisfy certain characteristics, and using that to understand when gerrymandering occurs. So I got into that literature, tried to apply my skills to doing that research. And at some point in there, I also met Robin, and she introduced me to the idea of the systems and processes that regulate our right to vote and our ability to be on the voting rolls. And what occurred to me as as we continue to discuss it and learn more about it, is that our legislators are very aggressive in proposing all these bills to regulate the process, but they do very little quantitative research about how it will impact voters. Or if they do it, they don't talk about it. Maybe their consultants do it or something. So that's where I saw myself plugging in, is that I could do quantitative research to try to understand how this legislation impacts voters, and hopefully apply my skills to that.
I think you might also be our first PhD in mathematics on the podcast as well. And
Right.
I'm going to pretty much call you like the rocket scientist here today. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you. That's too flattering. I don't deserve. I do not deserve that.
Well, thank you for your being humble as well. There's another compliment coming for that. So I want to keep these primarily two bills that we're going to be discussing today, separate as best as we can. To the best of our ability, we want everyone to have ability to be able to chime in. But we're going to go ahead and start with Senate Bill 16. Also known as the Texas SAVE Act. It would require a person to submit proof of citizenship to register to vote. And on face value, that seems to make sense. So obviously, we're going to go beyond the bill's summary. Vicente, what does this bill actually do to complicate our already extremely complicated and dated voting registration process?
It does a lot to infringe on people's rights to access to the ballot box, flat out. This is voter suppression, plain and simple. We've been doing so many webinars across the state. Robin has been there, and it's just infuriating what's happening at the moment, right? This bill will make it so much more difficult for folks to access the ballot box because it would require a documentary proof of citizenship, an additional proof of citizenship, because when we register to vote in the state of Texas, it already asks for our ID number or the last 4 digits of your social, which verifies that we are eligible, and we do it under penalty of perjury. People who vote in Texas elections are already only people who are U.S. eligible voters. This would create an additional barrier and a costly one because folks would need to prove their citizenship by taking their birth certificate or proof of documentary like a passport to the elections office. And they're only open from 9 to 5. If you have a full-time job, if you work 2 jobs, it would be difficult for you to do this. Also, like a birth certificate costs between $25 to $30, $50 sometimes, and it's such a long process for you to obtain a birth certificate, especially if you're born in a different state. And we do this for a living. As we mentioned, we do voter ID assistance, and this bill would just make it more difficult for folks to access the ballot box. It will create unnecessary barriers for voter registration that would disenfranchise millions of eligible voters. And this bill is an attempt by state legislators to implement, as you mentioned, a mini SAFE Act or a Texas SAFE Act at the state level. It is part of a wider attack of voting access and suppressing the vote of millions. It's a solution to a problem that does not exist.
And that's right. Something that I've seen, and I think, stretches to both of these bills that we are going to jump into, is that there really isn't a problem in folks being able to register, right? As far as that, we're getting a bunch of non-citizens or people that wouldn't be eligible, whatever that might be. Can anyone kind of jump into being able to explain that there isn't a problem? Robin, might you tell us a little bit about that?
We did analysis on voter fraud because our state leaders have been saying since 2011 and 12 that we have rampant fraud in Texas. And what that has done has popularized the myth that we have rampant fraud. So I think that adding to that, rampant fraud means non-citizens voting has probably been an easy step. But I've not done my own analysis on non-citizens voting in Texas, except to see very, very low numbers on the Secretary of State website. And to know from our relationships with county election experts that it's very rare. I mean, if somebody fills out a form to vote, they realize they've made a mistake.
Just one comment to add on to you, Robin. So when you found a couple of available databases, for example, the Heritage Foundation maintains a database of voter fraud cases, and they're incentivized to keep as many as they can on their site because they want to make this a big deal. But they were only able to find maybe 150 in Texas over a period of 15 or 20 years. So that is a drop in the bucket compared to the oceans of people that have voted. The number of fraudulent ballots is, astronomically small in Texas.
That's right. And I mean, that can be seen literally on, like you said, the Texas Secretary of State's website, where there's typically facts there rather than other places that perhaps some organizations, like you mentioned, the Heritage Foundation or Texas Public Policy Foundation, they can kind of stretch those numbers or add zeros on the end sometimes. Where I kind of want to center back to this, Vicente, is I can see that for registering voters, like nonpartisan organizations, whether it's Vote Riders or the League of Women Voters, or even just, organizations like United Way or just are community types of organizations that are out at your community fair. This would really pull those efforts to register folks back into like just government entities and buildings that not too many people always know where they are. And it'd make registering first-time voters, seniors, and minorities very difficult, to say the least. Would you agree? And can you kind of expand on that?
So we created a two-tier system. And essentially, folks are not able to prove their citizenship, and they'll have 10 days to do so. So basically, they would run to see the various databases that they have in place to see if you got your real ID, even though real ID cannot be used to show your citizenship. So they'll go through various databases to ensure the person is eligible to vote. But we've talked about people who have a different last name, people who got married would be affected by this. If their name is different now that on the birth certificate, it might remove them from the voter rolls, even though they say there's safeguards in place or ensures that this is not going to happen. We cannot 100% confirm that. Also, young folks are 3 times as likely as adults to be able to not have documents that show their proof of citizenship. It would just create new burdensome. It's just layers. As it is, as you mentioned, it's difficult. You need to find a VDR to register to vote. And also like mail-in ballots or mail-in applications is going to be difficult for folks to know. Sometimes if they are not in the system, though, the county will contact folks to see if they're registered to vote, or they need to show additional proof of citizenship. As I mentioned, the process to get a birth certificate can range from weeks to months. If you don't have the money to acquire a birth certificate, our organization like Vote Riders will help folks. If this bill becomes law, will help folks obtain their birth certificate. But we've seen how time consuming it is. We see how much time it takes, how much it costs to get these documents. And it's just an added layer to basically, it's a modern day poll tax.
Yeah.
We just want to ensure folks have the right information and ensure that folks are able to access the ballot box. This would mandate voter purchase based on flawed data, resulting in ineligible voters, including longtime voters, being improperly removed from voter rolls without proper notice and insufficient time to gather and present required documentation to re-register before elections. We see this happen in Arizona. Many people were moved from the voter rolls who were eligible voters, and it's going to happen in Texas as well. And if Texas gets sued, it's going to costs a lot of money for the taxpayers. We shouldn't be wasting our money. We should make voting accessible rather than more difficult for folks in Texas who are eligible voters.
I appreciate that. And Robin, did you want to add a little bit in on that too?
Just a big picture view. I think we over 2 million people. We're a big, wonderful state now, over 30 million people. A lot of people moving in from other states, they have to re-register.
That's right.
So, to put that in perspective, that's how many people it's going to impact. The new voters coming in, which we have 7 million voters on the 23 U.S. Census that are under 18 right now, but are coming into the process. They are citizens.
And they'll soon be needing to be able to vote, right? All of them should be invited into that. And I do want to say into this is, a lot of the times on these voting laws or legislations that are being proposed, we just, have red lights flashing. And on many of the issues that our audience listens to, it's like crisis, chaos. This is about to impact you. To be completely honest, if you have a real ID, which a lot of us do, I don't know the exact number, but a lot of us do. We have that star on our state license, our driver's license, so we can get on airplanes too. This will probably not totally affect you. But the issue is, to be completely honest, our audience cares about the people that it will affect. That's the whole point here. It's beautiful to say that, yes, I have a real ID right now, but they're worried about their neighbor that's a citizen that doesn't have a driver's license. They're worried about the 17-year-old that is going off to college and going to have to figure out how to get to the voter registration office to be able to register to vote, and figure out, let alone the bus to get to their first class if they're going to meet you, Andrea, for their first class, but to be able to figure out where the heck they go to the elections office. Andrea, did you want to throw in a little bit more about the hardship that this provides?
I could say a little bit. So, well, you mentioned college students, residential college students don't necessarily have a car when they go to their campus, but they are eligible to vote on campus. So if they can't register to vote, if they have to go to a registration office to vote and they don't have a car, this is a significant imposition, I think, on young people.
Mhm.
A passport, I recently got my passport renewed. I think that was about $160. That's a significant amount of money for a lot of people. So I think that I don't think you should minimize the kind of time and effort that this puts in people's way.
Yeah, and add a little bit more to that marginalized communities, because our audience cares about those folks, Vicente. What were you going to add here?
Yeah, and with what Andrea was saying, if they do need to show proof of citizenship, will they have their birth certificate on them? Over half of the country doesn't have their passport. I barely got mine at the ripe age of 29 for the first time a passport, and I've been voting since I was 18. If this law was present then and I didn't have any proof of citizenship, or wherever it is, wherever it is under whose bed, I don't know, right? That tends to how we safeguard or keep our documents safe. Um, as I mentioned, we do voter ID assistance. We help folks get their ID. Since 2019, we've helped dozens of eligible voters across the state to get an ID they need. And in the process, we help them get a citizenship document, such as a birth certificate. So we talked about the people we've helped, that's how time consuming it is, but we also did research on Texas specifically, which highlights about 1.3 million Texans who are US citizens of voting age would have difficulty showing documentation proving their citizenship and will likely be disenfranchised if Senate Bill 16 does become law. And approximately 166,000 US citizens in Texas do not have any documentary proof of citizenship. These numbers are bad, and nearly 1.1 Texans cannot easily access their documents. Honestly, I don't know where my birth certificate is right now. I see it I saw it in my pantry like 2-3 months ago. I need to verify where it is.
Next to the beans or something like
Yeah,
that. I
and
don't know. Yeah.
yeah, and I have access to this information, to this knowledge. I know what organizations like ours, Vote Riders, does in helping folks getting their ID. And if Senate Bill 16 does become law, like we'll help them obtain the birth certificate. But that's if they're aware of our resources. The people who are impacted, people who live in rural counties. Some like I live in Cameron County. From tip to tip, it's like 30 to an hour. So if you do need to prove their citizenship, you have to take time out of your day to drive at least an hour to a round trip. And who has that? Folks are still getting paid $7.25 the hour here in Texas. Like like if you need a birth certificate and it's like around $50, like that's like 7 hours of your life that folks don't have.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll kind of, as we're switching over to our next bill that we're going to highlight here, I'll say that there are some good bills out there that barely have gotten even a committee hearing. If folks want to see some good bills like automatic voter registration or online voter registration, go check out Representative Busey. He has proposed some really neat ways to get everybody to be able to exercise their right to vote. Again, fundamental to the way that democracies work. So now we're going to go ahead and move over to Senate Bill 396. That's Senate Bill 396. And Robin, I want you to help us introduce this to our audience by telling us, why does Texans need to be worrying about this? And first with that, how does Texas right now clean up its voter rolls? And with that, part 2 question, why do we need to be focused on this legislation?
Great question. What your status is in the voter record, the official government database, determines if and how you can vote. So when you register, you are put into the system, and if you go online at the county office, you'll see you're an A, you're active. Great. What happens if you move and you forget to update your address in the voter record? You take care of the bank and everything else, but don't think about voting, which you can do online. You can update your address. And the way the process works with the state is the county gets information from the post office that you have moved, and they send you a letter in the mail. and say you have 30 days. Please confirm, update your address for us. This is routine. It's a federal law that's been around since 93. Every state does it. It's been around that long, but it's still not known. So in November, for instance, in November 2024, 2 million Texans were in suspense. So you're active, suspense, or if you can't remember or you know you're registered and you go in and you're missing, then you've been purged. So the state, Texas, uses the process that every other state does from the federal law for voter list management. You move, the legislators in Congress said the state should have accurate and up-to-date records, send them a notice and have them update it. Great. Still done through old technology mail. And in Texas specifically, once they send that letter, they put you in suspense. So you go from active to suspense. And for the voters out there, no worries. Just go up and update your address. But you have to keep checking your status in the voter record. And if you forget and you go to vote and you're in suspense, you can still vote. They'll pull you out of the line to fill in a form, but you'll vote and your record will be updated. So that's there, and it has a major impact. 2 million people are on suspense in November 2024. So it's not like this is nothing. Even though there's 18 million voters, it's still too many.
This is election changing numbers from what I can tell. 2 million people.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, this bill, SB 396, is currently practiced in 22 states around the country. None as large as Texas, 18 million voters. What this bill does, it says, I'm going to look into the database and see if Vicente voted. If this becomes law, this is what will happen in December 25. I'm going to go into the database and look at Vicente. In December, after the November election, they could start implementing this bill, this law, if it becomes law, and check to see if he voted 25 months before. So November 23, which is a constitutional election, a lot of people didn't vote. So his name would go on a list, and Andrea is going to tell you, based on her review of the voter records after the November election, that's a lot. I'll let her tell you how many Texans are going to get caught up in this.
And so before I jump over to Andrea, can you tell me what the number of months that someone doesn't have to vote? Just real quick, tell me here.
In Texas, they're mirroring the Ohio bill, and it's 25 months. Other states have 1 year. Other states have 4 years. But when you combine this with, you have to register 30 days before elections in Texas. So you've got Texas, you already have that. We already have a very hard state to vote in, even though a lot of Texans don't know that. But compared to other states, we are a really hard state to vote on. Especially, that's why Representative Busey's trying to get that online voter registration. So when you add on, they're already doing effectively removing voters with the federal process. When you add on this state process, we're talking 4 million Texas voters that are sitting in the database active are going to be impacted. And Andrea will go into the more details, but think of it. You registered to vote, you decided not to vote. It never occurs to you that you're going to lose your right to vote.
That's exactly right. And just like you said, that 25 months. So someone can literally just say, I vote during presidential years, or I vote when I want to, when there's a candidate I want to vote for. But the issue is Texas is saying, hey, nah, you didn't vote for 25 months. You're gone. Not because you moved, not because we found a reason to kick you off other than you just haven't showed up for a bit.
They're putting the extra burden on the voter.
That's exactly right. A bigger burden on the voter. Dr. Barreiro, how many people is this going to affect in Texas? And kind of help me by understanding the active versus the suspense versus the purged.
As Robin described, there are 3 major statuses that you can be in as a voter. You can either be active, you can be in suspense, or you can be canceled or purged. Once you're in suspense, if you don't vote, if you don't confirm your address, and if you don't vote through 2 federal general elections, you will be removed. So think of that as it's like a yellow light. It's like it's almost like a probation period. Mm-hmm. After a certain point, if you don't take some action, you'll be removed. It's like you're on the way to removal. So now, if you're active and you remain active, you can remain registered indefinitely. You don't have to confirm that you still are who you are, you live where you live, you just are continue to be registered on the rolls. So what this bill, as Robin said, what this bill will do is it basically creates another pathway for active status voters to become suspense status voters, which puts them on the pathway to cancellation. And it would affect a lot of voters, a lot. So we analyzed 8 counties that had, I think, in total 7.5 million voters. We made sure to get some of the big populous counties,
It's like Harris,
Dallas, and Tarrant in particular.
Okay.
And I think on average it's about 20% of active voters. In Dallas County, that was 330,000 active voters would become suspense voters if that law was in place today. In Harris County, it's 650,000 voters. In Tarrant County, 250,000 voters. So if you're
Wow.
kind of counting in your head, I just summed up about 1.2 million voters in those 3 counties alone.
And those would be, just to get this totally in our head, if we had an election in November, or are we talking next November? Are these people literally that if the bill went into effect, they could be theoretically thrown off as soon as that?
So what the bill says, what would happen, what the bill says is that after every November general election, the counties will have to basically go and place all these people in suspense. Now, whether this process will start in November 2025 or whether they wait until November 2026, I guess depends on how they interpret that phrase general election. Does general election only refer to the federal elections in even numbered years, or does it also include the constitutional amendment elections in odd numbered years? I'm not sure I've gotten an answer on that.
My understanding is it does.
In which case, this bill in 2025, this bill would basically a lot of people only vote in presidential elections. So this bill would impact pretty much anyone who didn't vote in the 2024 November election.
Mm-hmm. And so what I want to hone here as well is that as we're deep diving into this bill, a lot of info is not always figured out, even before houses or senators, representatives or senators actually even vote on this. Like Progress Texas, myself, reached out to multiple people, whether it was, actually Senate staff or representative staff or some different organizations. I'll be honest that the League of Women Voters, there were some folks there that cleared it up for me. They read the legislation. They understood it. They said they looked at it through that legalese eye. And so the biggest thing here is that sometimes, specifically, I want to say, state representatives and state senators don't even know sometimes what they're voting on. And they don't even know the fiscal implications. That means how much darn money is going to be spent on enforcing things like this. We already spoke a little bit about how Senate Bill 16, the citizenship clause, proof of identity in that way, would cost a ton of money. The same thing here. Robin, Andrea, can you kind of tell us about that? These conservatives that you would think be worrying about how much money something's going to cost. Is it going to cost a lot more than they think it is?
Well, the original bill in 23 that we started our research on did not have any section of the bill requesting allocation in the budget. This bill added that. Sometime during February, March, or April, the bill added funding for county elections to administer 4 million notices. So what I sense from watching hearings, etc., the focus is not on the voter. There's nobody asking what happens to the voter. This is going to help us put more people on suspense, and which means that after a couple elections, they're purged.
To get to the money question, in Dallas County, we found that the number of voters would quadruple the current suspense list after the biennial cancellation of people who had been on the suspense list for 2 years. So that would be, quadruple the number of suspense letters going out by county election officials to voters. So whatever the amount of money that you have to pay to get a direct mail sent, to get those letters sent, that's what the county elections officials are going to have to be dealing with. They're going to be sending letters to 20% of their active voters that otherwise they would not have been sending.
There's no money in the bill for education. You combine this bill with Vicente, this SB 16. Imagine the impact, the devastation on voters in order to just understand. They haven't focused on this voter list maintenance stuff probably ever. The education push here, what do we say, Andrea? Volunteer organizations can't possibly do it.
Mm-hmm. And I might add to this as well, while we don't know exactly the amount of money that we're going to have to spend on a bill like this, which I would think would be important to someone voting on it, we do know the communities that it will be affecting. So one in particular I'm focusing on, where I used to, rent and be a tenant, is non-permanent address holders. It's folks that might be moving, different communities, and in the DFW or Houston or San Antonio or Rio Grande Valley, it's easy to move county lines. It's easy to move from district to district. What are some other community members that, specifically SB 396, the voter purge bill, if you don't vote for 25 months, what are some communities that it's going to be affecting?
Well, as I mentioned, I think one of the things I've really wanted to get in, and that I think legislators need to hear, is quantitative research. And so when we looked at the number of voters that would be affected, we looked at it by different districts, we looked at it by precincts, we looked at it by zip codes, and then we correlated this information with demographic information about those same geographical units. And we found very striking things, in particular with Texas House districts and the relationship with the fraction of the population that is non-Anglo. So we used the non-Anglo voting age population from the 2020 census, and essentially attempted to correlate those two quantities. What percentage of active voters would be impacted in a district, and what is the non-Anglo percentage in that district? And we found a very, very strong positive correlation that the higher the percentage of the district is non-Anglo, the higher the percentage of voters would be impacted. So in Dallas County, are you in Reagan? I don't remember. Are you in Dallas County?
I'm in far west Texas. You didn't look at Brewster County, I promise you. But at the same time, tell me about Dallas, because there's a lot of listeners up there.
Robin, is it all right if I say what I'm about to say? So the percentage of voters affected in Dallas County House districts, of which there are 14, goes from about 11% to 41%. The 11% is House District 108, which is a very affluent, very Anglo district, actually surrounding SMU here, where I am. That includes the very, very affluent cities of Highland Park and University Park.
Mm-hmm.
The 41% is House District 110. It's on the west side of the county, I think. Am I remembering that correctly, Robin?
Southwest, right?
Southwest part of the county. 93% identified as non-Anglo in the last census. So very, very diverse, very non-white district, huge numbers of people affected. But in the very affluent, very white district, not very many people affected.
That's really interesting that a piece of legislation that's being proposed would affect diverse communities a lot more than those that are, you would say, more affluent or just Anglo and white. And at the same time, we know just already from data that typically those more affluent communities vote more. And so even further taking away political voices, political power from those diverse communities. This is kind of like a double whammy in some way.
Absolutely. And we saw that very strong relationship in all of the three big urban counties that we studied: Harris, Dallas, and Tarrant.
That really frightens me a lot, that some of the people that are trying to basically disenfranchise people are getting smarter at the way that they're doing it. I want to kind of, as we're starting to come towards our end here, I want to make sure that we give everyone an opportunity to talk a little bit more about how we find out more about the work you're doing. And I want to start with you, Dr. Barreiro. I hear that this study is about to be published. Can you tell me where it is going to be published? We're really excited to see that come out. And further, is there any last thoughts that you want to be able to leave with our audience today?
So, first, I'll point out that Robin has put together a very great website for our organization, ncvr.org, and you can find a preliminary version of our study there. I think completed before the election. So it was based on a projection of how many voters would be impacted. Now, where we're trying to publish the study now is we're about to submit to a journal called the Journal of Technology Science that's run out of the Harvard Kennedy School. And they focus specifically on, they specifically take publish research papers that look at the intersection of science and technology and society, and how people are impacted by technology and how technological processes impact society. So we're very excited to be doing that. We're just about to I think we have submitted it, and it's going to right, Robin. We've submitted it, and it'll go through the editorial review process, and hopefully, perhaps after some revisions, we'll get to see it in print.
That's really, really, really neat. I've never, I've met a few folks that are doing doctoral studies, maybe, but at the same time, someone that's going to be published at Harvard University. Congratulations, truly, congratulations. It's amazing.
Well, wait to see if it happens first.
Oh yeah, we don't want to jinx anything. I'm doing both fingers crossed right here, Vicente. Both of these bills we mentioned, SB 16 as well as SB 396, they've been sent to the House Calendars Committee. They're both hanging out kind of there. That means they're kind of awaiting a time to get scheduled for a debate or a vote. What should Texans do right now?
As of now, as of May 20th.
That's today. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm hoping that we're going to get this out in the coming days, but we're going to date it right here.
Yes.
We're in the end of May right now, coming towards the end of the legislative session.
As of right now, it hasn't been scheduled on the floor. Hopefully it dies. House Bill 5337 died. Yay. Which it was basically the same thing as Senate Bill 16. So if it doesn't get voted on before this gets released, please call your elected official, your representative who represents you on the House. You can call the committee's calendar.
The calendars committee.
Calendars committee. To say for them not to put it up for a vote on the floor. We want folks to ensure that they use their voice and take action, and because the elected officials are supposed to make voting easier, not restricted. And this is what Senate Bill 16 is. Privileged citizenship laws are not about safeguarding elections. They're about silencing voters. And federal elections, as I mentioned, already have protection, election access, and integrity. And these laws make voter registration harder for American citizens and increase the risk of eligible voters being removed from the rolls. We partnered with a lot of amazing organizations such as Move Texas, the ACLU of Texas, Texas Civil Rights Project, so many organizations, as well as Robin has been present in our meetings where we are coming together and want to ensure folks are paying attention, because what happens in Texas doesn't stay in Texas. And that's what we like to remind folks. It always goes up somewhere. We're the guinea pig, and if it passes here, they'll try to implement it in different states. If we come together, I still believe in a democratic process. I still believe in advocacy, and I still believe that our elected officials work for us, and we need to show up. We need to make a call. We need to make an email. We need to inform our communities, because I'm the one in my family or in my group of friends that people call to me like, what do I do? How do I do it? And many of you probably already are that. So please visit us on Instagram, Vote Riders TX. On our Instagram, we also have a website, voteriders.org. If you or anyone needs voter ID assistance, you can contact us 866-432-8683 and just follow us. We do great work, and if your organization or know of an organization that would be able to use our resources, which our assistance is free of charge, please reach out to us so we can get the ball rolling.
And we're throwing some timely things in here too. Of course, we're testing our podcasting director here to get it out. But at the same time, I want to point folks to govotexas.org, and you can find you can find the resources like Vicente's Vote Riders resources on our website at govotexas.org. There's actually going to be an election coming up just in a couple weeks in San Antonio, the mayoral runoff and a lot of city council races. And then there will be votes in November of 2025. And then, of course, we have primaries and we have a general election in 2026, the midterms. But before we get all there, Robin, close us out here today. Any last thoughts on our Senate bills that we've been highlighting today? And of course, where can we find more about the National Coalition for Voting Rights?
As an individual, controlling what the legislature is going to do, it's probably very, 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 very hard. Understatement. But as an individual, making sure your voter record, it's up to you. You can do it. Just check your status, keep it updated. And those state processes that are done all over the country will not impact you. The people sending lists to county elections saying they don't live here, they're at the wrong address, not going to impact you. So the voter is in control. That's the best thing about our work. We can point out what's going to happen, and we can hope public policy leaders listen. But if we get voters to educate each other that they can stay active, in the voter database, and not be impacted. So if this bill, SB 396, becomes law and you haven't voted for a while, vote in these Junes, vote in November, just vote. You're not going to be on that database in December when they go to see who hasn't voted. And even if it doesn't become law, we already have 2 million people in suspense in November 24. And guess how many people were purged in December 25, in December 24 and January 25? 690,000 purged. And they don't know. So one more thing, I hope I can add this, that Andrea and I obviously want to study the process, do the research, but we also want to find ways to communicate, especially with young voters. And we also know from the Harvard Kennedy School, the Public Tech Interest Lab, that they have an application called Vote Flare. And if you go up to their website, Journals of Technology Science, you'll see studies done. And what that does is you sign up and it will text you if something changes in your data record, your voter record. So you moved, you signed up, you don't want to have to worry about this voter stuff. And you get a text. We would love to do, we think we need to do, because of Texas' size and the impact of these bills, a pilot in Texas. So if anybody's out there interested in working with us to see if we can get that done and invest in it, it's robin1117@mac.com, or you can send a message through our website, ncvr.org, or we have a Substack now that Andrea and I are doing, and it's under my name. Sorry, Andrea, they wouldn't let me put two names. You can get through to me there.
That's fantastic, Robin. And I just want to say a big thank you to Robin Lederer and Dr. Andrea Barreiro of the National Coalition for Voting Rights. I want to thank y'all a lot for putting data behind what we say. And thank you, Vicente Martinez Jr., with the who is the Texas State Director with Vote Riders. Thank you for your engagement and enthusiasm and organizing your community, because we need all hands on deck. Here at Progress Texas, we are in the business of countering the conservative disinformation machine that's largely responsible for the election lies of Donald Trump. But while that machine is funded by oil billionaires, tech billionaires, religious far-right wing groups, and more, we rely mostly on everyday Texans who value our hard work and share our belief that a Texas that works for everybody is the Texas we want to live in. We don't do subscriptions or paywalls because we believe the message of progress is one that everyone should be able to access, learn from, and act upon. So if you become a regular listener, we could use your investment, and no amount is too small. Thank you to all of our valued listeners and everyone who's invested in our work. Go to progresstexas.org/donate and you can be named on an upcoming episode as well. Thanks to all of those that are pressing progress forward. Thank you all again, and see you next time.
The Progress Texas Happy Hour is a production of Progress Texas, a rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. Find us online at progresstexas.org and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The podcast is produced by me, Chris Mosier, and our featured music is by Walker Lukens. Please be sure and subscribe to the Progress Texas Happy Hour on the podcast platform of your choice. Take a moment to leave us a review if you've enjoyed the show, and be sure and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening and for all you do to press progress forward here in the Lone Star State. We'll see you again next week.